Hey folks, thanks for tuning in to the latest episode of Vinyl and Vision. Here we are with episode 92. Today's very special guest is Martin Bisi, founder, engineer, producer for Bisi Studios in Gowanus, Brooklyn, New York. He is also a musician. He actually has a very brand new record out called Feral Myths. What you're listening to is the first track off of that album called The Octave Bridge. Man, it was a great honor for me to be able to take some time and speak with Martin at his request. You know, what I do here at the show is I talk to people about an album that is influential to their art form, whatever it is that they make. And that's the way I proposed it to Martin. But he came back at me saying, would you be interested in talking about an album that I've recorded? Now, the history of Bisi Studios is extensive. There's over 40 years of music being recorded from there. Bisi Studios is responsible for recording a number of bands' albums like Sonic Youth, some of their earlier records, Swans, Material, Herbie Hancock, just to name a few. In this conversation, Martin also reminds me of recording with US Maple and X Models. It's an extensive discography that comes out of that studio. But Martin suggested this album, the Dresden Dolls' self-titled debut. And so now, being an older gentleman and having a little bit more understanding of what music is and can be, I listened to that record recently and I realized that it's actually a very good record. But then listening with a more kind of more depth and with like a little bit of a better ear, listening to the dynamics of the record, to you know, the aspects of the actual recording and the way that it was recorded and the way that it presents itself as a piece. That was very alluring to me. And so I did agree to do this and have this conversation based on an album that he participated in as opposed to an album that just kind of informed and influenced his work going forward. So I think it's great. I hope you guys enjoy it as well. I know it might not necessarily be your cup of tea. This album was not necessarily my cup of tea either. But like I said, I can appreciate it. I can understand it for what it is. And it's in depth and it's great. So if you're a fan of Dresden Dolls, this can be quite a treat for you. If you're not, if you're a fan of Martin and some of the work that he's done, this can also be a treat for you. If you're a gearhead, if you're an aspiring producer or engineer, this is also kind of cool. So I hope you like it. And if you do, all that we ask here is that you please do all the things you do with the internet. Like, share, subscribe, comment, rate, review, all of those things. You can follow me on social medias. I'm on Instagram and all that stuff. And if you care to help us in a more financial way, you can always go to our website, www.psychicstatic.net. Any purchase you make there goes towards helping fund the show. And Lord knows we need it. Also, I forgot to mention a couple things that I will list in the show notes if you're interested in them. At the end of this episode, I talked with Martin about a few of the bands that he's most recently recorded, as well as links to find Martin's documentary that I've purchased and watched, which is great, The Sound and Chaos. You can get it through his website for $4.99. It's a great deal, as well as a link to the Voice of Gowanus site, where you can read up more about the political turmoil that Martin is kind of involved in as a political activist to try to bring attention and reform to the Gowanus section of Brooklyn. Because from what I can see, based on the documentary that I watched, it's not doing so great. It's you know, gentrification is not helping. It's a very polluted area of New York, and there needs to be a lot of remediation to happen around there. And so all types of support that is poured into them and through this organization, the Voice of Gowanus, can help maybe have some of that remediation happen. And I believe it's pretty sorely needed. So anything that you can do to help in that fight, raise some attention to the cause, is much appreciated. So thank you very much, folks. Enjoy. Hello, Martin Bisi.
Hi.
So how are you doing, Martin?
Cool.
I was about to call you Mr. BC. Is that okay? Can I do that?
You want to call me Mr. Bisi? No.
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I get people on the line. I'm just like, oh, hey, Mr. BC, how are you doing? And I know I shouldn't do that. It's a little bit of a respect thing, you know. It's just like when you're speaking to somebody.
Yeah, no, it's funny. That's a very American thing. It's funny because my family from Argentina had to get used to the idea that in like the even formal business settings that you would use first names, that Americans use first names.
Right.
Even me dealing with like politics a bit more, like dealing with elected officials, calling my congressman Dan. Yeah. So I don't particularly feel like Mr. Bisi.
Yeah.
It's fine, but because I like being, I'm a bit juvenile. Like I never grew up, so I like to think I didn't. The biological clock says otherwise, but I like to think I'm not that different than when I was. I don't even think wiser. It's not even a question of why. Maybe making a few better choices here and there, but I like to think I'm the same person I was when I was 20.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, hey, you are what you feel, really. I mean, that's what I'm gathering as I get older myself. So, but I also thought it was funny because I feel like we have a little bit of a couple of similarities. Like you just mentioned that your family was from Argentina. Your parents were from Argentina, and therefore you are Argentinian. Though I'm sure consider yourself American, but I'm the same. I'm from immigrant family, where I'm Bolivian actually, but I'm 100% American. I'm
Oh,
born here and speak English. I don't speak Spanish much at all.
yeah. I tried to keep the Spanish up a little bit, and I mean, I'm still a native speaker, which makes a big difference. It's like I'm in this weird zone where it's not perfect, but I'm actually still a native, technically native. It was still my first language.
Oh, really?
I think my parents weren't that set, really. Yeah, well, we spoke Spanish at home,
Okay.
and I remember in private, my mom spoke to me in English, and my dad spoke. Like when I was alone with either parent, my mom spoke in English, and my dad in Spanish. So I spoke Spanish with extended family, but you can lose everything. You can be like you or I were totally like English speakers. We could lose that if we went 20 years without speaking it and lived in some other country. We'd get the other country's accent. We'd start forgetting
Hmm.
words. I mean, it's crazy when that happens. But expats tell me that it's crazy forgetting the mother tongue. But
Right.
yeah, so I like it. It feels nice to speak Spanish. It's a different part of my brain. I have a
Yeah.
different personality when I speak Spanish.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's definitely like a different brain because it's different part.
Right, right. Yeah, I only speak Spanish if I'm like really like drinking heavily and like I meet somebody that speaks Spanish and is just like, talks me up. Otherwise, like I dream in Spanish sometimes. Like I feel like I do really well when I'm subconscious, but when I try to actually pronounce it, that's when I fuck up everything. And I just sound like I sound like a 5-year-old. Like I can't say anything right.
Well, I can't even imagine what the Bolivian Spanish is. I've never even heard that. Plus there's so many indigenous people in Bolivia,
Yeah. Yeah.
that there must be a lot of like hybrid language and stuff. Like
Yeah,
Paraguay. A lot of people in Paraguay speak Guarani.
right, right. Yeah, Quechua is the native language in
Yeah.
Bolivia, and I know a little bit of that. Like I've heard, like my grandmother actually speaks it pretty well, but and I've heard people speak it, but I don't really know it.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a big language group that goes all the way into Argentina, actually, even into the Andes Mountains of Argentina.
right.
It's right along the spine there. It
Yeah,
was
I'm
the language
sure.
of the Incas and I guess maybe other pre-Incan cultures from that area.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure of it. Yeah. Cool. Well, the other thing I feel like we have kind of a mutual some similarity in is that I watched your documentary last night. The oh, man, what is it called now?
Sound and chaos.
The Sound and Chaos, right? I purchased it from your website, by the way. 4.99, great deal.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, man. It was great. It was a really great documentary, and in it, I realized that you are very much like an kind of an analog purist, almost, almost.
It's funny. There's a bit of a nuance that I need to apply there because um, I don't actually and never really was convinced that any of that was better. I'm just very aware of process and that it's a lot goes into making something turn out one way or the other. And I'm aware that it's complicated. It's hard to draw conclusions that you do this and that's how it turns out. There's like other factors. And lots of times people are unaware of the factors or don't consider them. Then it gets up, oh, if we recorded onto tape, this is how it turned out.
Mm-hmm.
So that must be the way it is. And I feel I need to, that's not good enough for me as an analysis. I need to be, well, what about the engineer? Maybe it was the engineer who was running the tape machine. Maybe that person, maybe their ears, maybe because if it's tape machine, maybe it's just an older person that with more experience. So that's why it turned out better than in a place that it was all digital or something like that. Or, so I'm just aware of, I'm also feel that way about myself personally, is that when things are working, I'm not in a big rush to change them. It's just like the same thing as I'm not in a big rush to change myself even. Like it's working. Why do I want to I'm not looking for anything new. I'm like, right. I like what I'm doing. I think I'm getting results. I should probably just keep most of that the same. So I think of that in the studio as well. So it took me a while to move from tape to digital. I did it in steps, really. At first I had the Pro Tools running with the tape, sure. and then I did more because I just don't know. I'm not ready to draw any conclusions. How do I know? From one try, I'm going to go, oh, that one A/B, listening, comparing. It's like, I don't know, maybe maybe tape's better for snare drum, and which maybe it is, and maybe digital is better for voice, which it might be, so there's a lot of nuance there. What about cymbals? Sure, maybe cymbals are better digital, but maybe
depends on the project too. Depends on the band and all that.
All kinds of things. There's just too many, and I'm too weeds of that. I feel I'm too to make quick assumptions or draw quick conclusions. So I always change very slowly in the studio, all kinds of stuff. I still use ancient Pro Tools at this point, because it's like, why am I going to change this now when there's Grammy winning records that people still swear by that were recorded on my old Pro Tools with those old converters, and it's still, you still have, I don't know, Radiohead or something. It's still records, still people hold in high esteem. So that's the system I'm using. So why would I necessarily just change the reason? So it takes me a while. And usually what it is when it's only when I'm confronted with a reality where I could be making better records, or certain standards change. There was one point where it was unacceptable to run out of tracks anymore. That was it. You could not run out of tracks. There was, because it was a time acceptable in a session to say, I guess we're done with overdubs because we're out of tracks. Can't do anything more. We're done. So that would, people would go, oh, okay, and just have to think about it, or maybe make a hard choice of erasing something. But yeah, no, that's unacceptable anymore. So that was a point where I started having to include digital. So anyway, it's a long story to say is I'm not really an analog purist as any kind of dogma, for sure.
Right. Okay, but you do still use a lot of analog. To be said
for analog, and I just want to. Yeah, I do, but it's more because it's what I use and what I'm familiar with. It's more that than I think it's better, and everyone else would be doing a lot better. That everyone else would be better off using the same stuff I do. No, not necessarily. Right. Okay. I realize people have it's familiarity with the gear. I still always say ears over gear. I always say that, right? So it's not the gear making. I'm very different from Steve Albini in that sense, who's very much gear over ear, right? Like Steve Albini, yeah. He likes saying he's totally unbiased. He's a neutral observer. He just chooses the gear. The gear is the thing that's determined of the sound. And I'm like, sure. It's still. I just feel the opposite. Basically, that's the thing too. Is on whose dime am I going to make these changes? Because I'm also aware that if that. It's funny because I realize with all these different formats, all of them, I find a way slowly but surely, incrementally, I start getting better results in some new way of doing things. And it just comes slowly by using it. I realized the little change things where I couldn't get a good snare sound on digital at one point. And then I'm like, oh, wow, here we are 8 months later. I'm getting good snare sounds, right? I don't even know what it is. It's just little sense of where I place things or attitude about things. So to change things and you come in and I just change something, and it's going to take me a while. Not necessarily, you don't want to hear that. You don't want to come in to record something with me and I'm saying, hey, I got this whole new system. So that's why I have to almost change slowly as I change.
Sure, sure. So you just mentioned Steve Albini, who's someone else I was thinking about recently because preparing to speak with you, I know that you do and have done a lot of production work, and he's one of those people that I think of when I think of a producer, and I know that his thing is that I forget how they say it, but he essentially treats his job as a producer kind of like a plumber, where you pay him for a position, you pay him for the job, and that's it. Like none of these point stuff, like none of these like royalties that come in for the recordings he does. He gets a flat fee. Do you do the same thing, or are you kind of interested in points as well?
That's a good question. I'm not interested in points and any of that stuff. Bunch of reasons, because very few of the records I do, particularly now, end up making a lot of money or making any kind of. And the reason I said a lot of money is because it's funny because there's only one exception. It's really funny. There's one exception. Always 40 years of record actually get the record. I believe we're talking, which is the Dresden Dolls record, and it's funny because I told them and here's the thing, it's the reason I said a lot of money is because I'm not interested in little bits of money from like a record. Like I'd rather the artist get the money and use the money because there's so much to be done. If you think of a band, they're going to have to like things go kind of well and they get in a dance and some money from the sales. They need money to maybe take time off of work, or they need a van, or they need new equipment, or they need to put it towards recording, all kinds of stuff. I'd much rather that actually serves me better, which is the band kind of being able to take things somewhere. And I mean, there's a good number of records I do, and band breaks up, and it's like very sad. The record just sits there, or it gets released just sort of as an afterthought, like a year or so, or 2 years later or something. So I'm not really interested in. It doesn't occur to me that I would like any money unless there really was a lot of money. Like the band really does super well. So even with the Dresden Dolls, I told them, because Amanda Palmer is a bit, she's actually got a good sense of business on her shoulders, and she wanted to make sure that all the T's were crossed and I's were dotted. And I said, I'm not into. We said so. I said, look, if you sell over 10,000 copies, then maybe we can figure something out, but until then, something that I said, not thinking they would ever reach 10,000 copies, and they freaking sold 10,000 copies in the first month, practically, from like her bedroom.
Right.
It was as a self-release. I'm also, honestly, I don't know with Steve Albini, just saying I've thought that, I'm not sure he has no points on anything. So I'm sorry to be a little skeptical on whether it's completely true.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense. I mean,
There, I
especially
said
the
it.
the caliber the caliber of projects that he's been on and been involved with. I mean, it would make sense. I mean, but at the same time, from what I know and at the loose amount of information that I've researched about him, like just scraping by to kind of keep his studio afloat, having a hard time making the payments every month, basically. So it's like, well, if you got that royalty from In Utero, let's say, like that should probably help your studio out, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard through the grapevine that, on the other hand, he regretted not getting points on some things. So maybe, I guess he's human in that way.
Sure.
But so I'm not sure it's as hard and clear cut. I mean, I guess I know what he's saying, but he definitely has this attitude of really dissing producers, like very insulting, really,
Right.
about producers. And it's really hard to say. Sometimes it just started becoming this like dogmatic, purist position where it's like, well, sometimes people want a producer, like with the Dresden Dolls, they wanted to work with someone that had some more clear ideas about um, about how to record stuff, also help form the material a little bit, because they worked on the material a lot, but there was a lot of loose ends or things that needed to be decided, or so I think that they were open to a producer maybe even making sessions on the material itself, arrangements. like I don't know, maybe, or song choices and stuff like that. Also, they were very young. To just demonize the of Sir is kind of weird, you know. Also, I do very few productions where I'm a dedicated producer, where people say I'm the producer. But so it's usually like I'm a co-producer, or I'm a producer engineer. And
Right.
even within that, sometimes it's all easy and good. People just tell me how much involvement they want me to have. Sometimes people ask my opinion. Sometimes they don't, and that's all good. The interest is I feel satisfied. Well, of course, with the people being happy,
Mhm.
and with other people being happy and liking the record, and but when it's not needed, I'm also just as happy. And I usually think that on the record, including the Dresden Dolls, um, the strongest material need a lot of extra input. So I think that that's better. I think when a band comes into me and everything is locked down, they already know it. They know the songs, and those end up being the stronger songs on the record. Like if anything's possibly going to be a hit on the record, it's going to be one of those songs. They're going to be older songs. Even with the Dresden Dolls, some of the stronger songs were the songs they were tired of. Like "Girl Anachronism" is a song that they'd actually previously released on this like home EP, and it's like one of the strongest songs on the record. So that's what I like. Also, is of the moment in a way. Like you want a record to feel like have this like abstract quality of being in the moment. So it represents the artist or the band in their current moment of how they're feeling, what they're thinking, what they're listening to. And same with me. So to actually include that on the record can give it some special thing. I mean, really, everything about a record you want to be like timely and in the moment. That's it. Some records, in fact, the Dresden Dolls, I think took like a year to do, but
Really?
to record, but yeah, it was a long stretch, a very long stretch, and partly because they're Boston and I was in Brooklyn, so they had to come back and forth a bunch, and you want to be able to relate to it. You want to be able to, the listener wants to be able to go into it, and so it being of a certain time or a particular place, which I think is kind of exciting. I listen to very old records. I imagine the scene in the video and what those people must be like, and what it would be like to even be in that situation. So I'm kind of reliving. So the record as a moment. So that's why I was saying it's nice to stretch out in the studio a little bit, because it makes it a creation. It makes it real. Like I'm not so into it just being a documentation increasingly. So I'm not so into just being a documentation of songs. Anyway, so that's kind of my view of records. I think they're kind of an important experience. And I think, so sometimes even in productions now, I don't like gratuitous effects, and if it's just some BS like overproduction, I'm not particularly interested.
Sure. So let me ask you a couple of questions. I first of all, I asked you to come on to the show because I wanted to speak to you about, particularly an album that was influential to you. In our communication, we kind of like, wound it down to the idea of doing something a little different, which is talking about an album that you actually had worked on, and how that might have actually also influenced you in a sense, and kind of like, I guess, maybe in the way that you work and going forward. But before that, like growing up as an adolescent, what were you listening to that was kind of like turning you on to music as a young person?
Well, here's the thing: is that is so long ago at this point. I
Sure.
mean, I'm old,
Well, what was like
so
one of
it's
the
just like.
first things that like you can kind of creep into your memory?
Also, I think that the very influential music when I was very young inspired me more directly in my work was actually not even records. It was live shows, and I'm not so sure if all the bands even had records or had been recorded, or whether the recordings would be particularly that special. But that would be back in my late teens. So like my mid teens, when it was still about records, I came of age as a listener in the wake of the 60s. It was still all about like Jimi Hendrix, stuff like that. And in fact, it's music, but it's also like a sort of role modeling kind of situation. So Jimi Hendrix was kind of a role model in a way. Like that's part of when you're young. These rock stars are the people you look up to and make bigger than life. So I was listening to Hendrix, but it did speak to a little bit of what I what I found important in music. And really, I think Hendrix is that there was something very wild about the music. Also, its sort of improvisational nature, and also with the drumming was kind of like this free jazz thing a lot of times, even though it was rock.
It's true.
And just also his whole persona, he just talked about music and stuff. So it was this sort of wild, very liberating kind of primordial kind of thing, and that was super important to me. And then it was also the complexity. I was very kind of into like prog, basically. So I liked stuff that was more orchestral sounding or complex. And even though I was rebelling from my classical music background, because my mom was a classical pianist and, you know, very accomplished, would go on big tours and stuff. And I was being taken to the New York Philharmonic weekly. We had season, so every Thursday we'd go to see the Philharmonic, and I'd be in a suit and tie. And then every other Monday we go to the Metropolitan Opera. So I saw opera as well. And you know, I felt at the time that like, I was really miserable in all those conditions. But the whole idea of like how that sort of upbringing, you know, hearing my mom would play every night, really. Like, so after I went to sleep or was kind of almost asleep or whatever, my mom would play for a couple hours, like practicing in the house on a piano, on a baby grand piano. So how much of that affected my ear, I don't really know. It seems in retrospect that actually had more of an effect on my ear than my rebel self would have ever admitted to at the time, because even now in my latest record, I'm freaking like opera sounding vocals on my new record.
I noticed that. Yeah.
And there's been on a few records, right? These like on so up there goes what I was saying, that how much I don't like opera, and there I go putting opera on everything.
Right. Yeah.
But you
little contradictory.
It's also done in my weird way. My ear is there. Yeah, of course. And then also with like Frank Zappa, I loved all those huge productions, and you know, I remember in my mind. I mean, I went to see him live at the Palladium. He would play every Halloween, and I remember those huge things with like orchestral drums up on stage, and so I think like a dense orchestral sound was always something that I went to. I know that there's two poles really in sound. There's a sort of you know, cut and dry. Kind of straightforward, and that has a lot of value. And then there's the other pole, which is very Baroque and gothy, if you will. I feel like the more dense Baroque qualities are a little more of my forte. I'd like to think I am also pretty good with, like, you know, in your face, straightforward. I like to think I'm good at that, or certainly good enough to do those kinds of projects. But those are the poles. Like, for instance, when I worked on the band, US Maple from Chicago. They're kind of a post-rock band.
Yeah, I know.
I believe that was on Drag City.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was the kind of thing. They're not into a lot of extra flourishes, right? That record I recorded for them actually had Michael Giroff from Swans as the producer, and he was ready to stretch out, right? He was ready to like add overdubs and like backup vocals and chants, percussion and hand claps and flutes, and really that was just not their style. They were a little more purist. They were a little more like bare bone kind of thing. So I still think, and I think as an engineer, I think I did a good job on that record. In particular, the record's called Talker. But that's the other pole, right? And so that was a funny situation, because you had Gerard coming from the opposite pole. And, you know, we're all good here because the reason they asked Gerard is because they love those Swans records. The problem with them asking Gerard from the Swans was that that's what Gerard does, you know? So if you ask that person, that's why sometimes I recommend with people picking an engineer or a producer, it's like, it's not a question of like loving those records. It's like, really give a listen and imagine yourself, you know, kind of sounding like that. Right, or at least some of those ways. If you're gonna like, it's not like this sort of, like, everyone is biased. They have a sound. It's not like, well, this person is great. They're a great producer, and that means they can kind of do anything well. Not necessarily, you know, that's their like niche. Look, I think any producer or engineer should have several niches. I like to think I've like 5 kinds of things that I'm kind of good at.
Sure.
But unfortunately, it's not endless. I mean, I think I'm pretty good at a lot of stuff, but I have my little lanes. So you need to kind of figure out what that is.
Right, right. And you know, from my understanding of like what producers like role is, like my menial understanding as a kid growing up, it's into now where I still kind of understand, like I understand it better, I feel. Um I think there was a lot of talk about like, oh well, the producer is like the like fifth or the secret member of the band for the time in which that group is working together to record that album. And you know, you as a producer, you would probably actually have a lot of influence over like what that end result is going to end up looking like. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, I think that's why, even if I'm just engineering, it's also arguable that I'm the co-producer.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
also, just from my own personal ethics or whatever, and it's a bit of a privilege. I don't feel I need production credit on anything I do at this point. I mean, for me, it's almost the problems the other way. Is that, and it's kind of what you just said. Is that if my name is on it, there's definitely some people that think I just totally like found the band, and that's if they like the record, that's like that's why it's a Martin Bisi record, and that's a privilege. I'm lucky that I've done enough records that there's some people
Right.
that might even think that. So yeah, but on the other hand, I don't think we need to double down on
Right. Right.
my participation where I'm like, oh no, I'm just the engineer. They credited me as recorded by, and it's like all this other stuff I did, and no one's going to appreciate it. In fact, it's the other way around, where sometimes I need to kind of bring people down and say, no, I actually didn't have that. I didn't do those things or something.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's a privilege. And I try to tell people that even here's the point I make is even if I do it entirely their way, it's still going to have a bias of how I might sometimes do things. Like I'm still in there no matter what. And it's because anything that you say, it's like, let's say you say anything like we want to be kind of big and wide, or we want to be in your face and driving, or we want to be all this kind of stuff. And I
Hmm.
usually invite all those. I usually invite all those kinds of comments. I often like the the what and the why, right? So sometimes people tell me want like this, and sometimes also the why, because it's and something maybe some more abstract thing. I like people
Sure.
giving me abstract direction as well. But here's my point: is that it's someone's going to do that, and in doing it, there's like 50 choices. So as I'm sitting there, okay, I'm going to do the thing that I was just told to do, and it's way too time consuming to discuss every little choice. It just no one even wants that. Also, there's sort of bias that happens, particularly in the mixing, which no one really kind of argues with, really, is that I'm always inescapably asking myself what is my favorite thing about the song, or what is my favorite thing about this band or this particular record, maybe because it's a different record, maybe it's not the first record I've recorded for the band.
Hmm.
As I'm always asking myself, well, what's my favorite thing? It could be literally anything in a song. It could be like my favorite thing is the beats, or the textures, or the layers, or the words, or the quality of the voice, all kinds of stuff, right? And
Right.
so very simply, I just make sure that the listener hears that, or make sure that the listener is somehow drawn, and whatever little hoodoo voodoo I might do, the listener is drawn to those things, so that
Right.
happens, eventually. Like you can hear it in some of the Sonic Youth stuff where it's like, ultimately, I want people to think that this band, or like the guitars, are really, exceptional and are doing something very experimental and very new and novel, that there's a lot of innovation with guitars. So
Hmm.
that comes through more than like it's a cool beat. Although it might be a cool beat too. So
Sure.
I try to have it both ways, but just enough to make sure that no one mixes it up, that no one's going
Yes.
to say, oh, here is this band Sonic Youth and it's about the rhythm. Sorry, drummers, but so that would be the case with that.
Sure.
Same with with the Dresden Dolls, where it was like the piano was unique,
Right.
and so
Right.
that's kind of a little bit more. It's not incidental. It's so even there, it's not just 50-50. It might be 65% the piano, just because I think
Sure.
that that's
Sure.
the drums are cool, but they're not that innovative. It's whereas having a band like that with piano, particularly an acoustic piano, not an electronic piano, that's an innovation. So that should sort of be inescapable.
Right, right. Now, because you already now that you're talking about the Dresden Dolls, you know, this is the album that we're going to be focusing on. It's this was your choice. You gave me a couple of options, and neither of which I was totally familiar with. So I listened to both of the options. One being Cop Shoe Cop. What was the name of that album? Ask Questions Later.
Questions Later, or
Ask
could have
Questions
been,
Later. Right.
yeah, okay.
And then there was this one, the Dresden Dolls debut album. So I listened to both of those, and I ended up opting to choose this record because it's the first word that comes to mind is dynamics. I think that this record, based on what I know about your previous work, all of it is great for many reasons, kind of like some of the stuff you were mentioning. All these bands have all these different aspects about them that are compelling for one reason or another. uh, and then this album at this time, this was 2003, I believe, correct? So
Yeah.
this was late into your career. So I'm curious, like, at the time of this recording, you already had a number of recording and producing credits of various degrees of success and various, styles of bands that you were working with. So, well, like, what do you feel about this band and this album going into this record at that time in like 2003?
Yeah, well, we actually started recording in 2002.
Okay.
I also met them for the first time in 2001, so it's a bit of a process.
Oh, okay.
I met Amanda Palmer in my building. The building manager had met her somewhere, I think maybe in Europe even, and actually had been invited and went up to that weird building in South Boston, where like Tremont or whatever,
Okay.
and Shamut, something like that, in Boston. And she was in this weird building, and my building manager from here went there, and because she was talking about what a cool building it was, and it seemed like it was a topic that my building manager was interested, because the person in that building in Boston, the building itself was a work of art, right? Like building it, like it was like almost like a Cousteau set, like the stairwells, and then there was like a tree house in the top floor and a
Hmm.
dome at the top, and and so
Okay.
he heard her perform there, like solo piano, and he was blown away. And so she came down to New York to my building, and I realized later that she was already scoping me out. Right, she was a big Swans fan, and she thought, well, let's she would be kind of thinking about maybe recording. Nothing Stone thought maybe it might be cool to meet Martin and see the studio.
Right.
It was an interesting time. I got excited about doing it for a few reasons. For one thing, it was um, it's funny. I mentioned before how I like thinking of myself as pretty young. Is for me, youth culture is a big deal. So it's kind of limited me a little bit as a musician, that I've never fit that well in sort of the avant-garde world of like very serious musicians
Hmm.
that put music at the center of
Right.
like what they do, and it's very accomplished as a musicianship. For me, it's really, a lot of it has to do with, I'm really a punk in that way. Is that it really has to do with like youth culture. I feel youth culture kind of saved my life. You know, my mom died when I was 12. My dad died when I was 17. So what was there? I was writing graffiti, and I was very excited about like hardcore culture, and I was excited about a hip hop culture in the South Bronx. So it was
Hmm.
all about youth culture. So I always felt like you can't lose sight. Like that's this world. So I came from this world where it's like I don't put down youth culture. I don't even like the idea of like a more adult outcome. And I mean, part
Sure.
of me is still like I need it to be kind of DIY, or at least I don't want to get too far from that. I still go to a lot of local shows, and like I really support DIY venues. I think they're just absolutely essential.
Oh yeah,
And so the
of
Dresden
course.
Dolls they came from that. It felt like, when I met Amanda, she was also talking to me about busking, right? So she would perform on the street.
All right.
So that was interesting. Um, Also, like when I was in high school, I was in the theater class. So her whole thing was very theatrical and very visual. And it's funny because I thought about it. It's not like I'm like, oh, I want to be a part of that. It's just that's just familiar terrain for me. So I think when you know,
Hmm.
I even wish she actually directed a play in Boston and invited me, and I went and saw it. And then soon after, I met her before 9/11, and then I met her in like August 2001, and 9/11 happened. And the first time I went to visit her and Brian, they invited me up to Boston. I was like ready to leave New York. I was ready to like a day trip. Thank you very much. I was ready to just get on a train and go somewhere that wasn't New York City, that didn't have a plume of like, putrid, toxic, like, because I was I was in almost the daily plume of ground zero for like months.
Oh man.
That smoke kept going. It kept going. So it was fascinating really to be up in Boston. And people not under the cloud. Like I was like, wow, this is crazy. They're like, everyone in New York, it was a downer. Let me just tell you, everyone was like you couldn't see someone without like, well, where were you on 9/11? Like it's like all the time. And it was depressing. Everyone was depressed. And I went up and I was like, oh wow, people going about the business of making music. Also, I liked their sort of that's the sort of thing that reminded me of like the early days when New York City was much more affordable and we could all be kind of dilettantes in a way. And, like you could survive in New York with like working 2 days a month or something crazy. I mean, I would pay my nut of studio before it became a recording studio, because it was 2 years. So we just had it as a loft and stuff. And a couple of us lived here. Like my nut was like hanging art in a friend's gallery like twice a month. That's the rent. Bam. Right. So there's that life where you could really like stay out all night. I would often come back to this space at like dawn, because we'd be at the Mud Club and all this stuff. And there's a lot. It's not like lazy. We were working our asses off. And sure. I think you need that kind of this world now where people are like suffocated with having to have like 3 jobs to like pay a rent that's like 40% of their income. I mean, it's not good. And you were losing the potential of like, I mean, look what that time did for the culture of the world and the culture of New York City. It was like punk and all kinds of art scenes. And it was New York City was an arts capital. But anyway, so when I went to Boston and saw post 9/11, saw the Dresden Dolls, I liked the fact, one thing that caught me was like, wow, they go out at night and they go out during the day and they're dressed the same, right? There's no work clothes, right? So they still are going out during the day looking like goths, like they did at night. That's a little thing that caught my eye. I was like, I thought that was cool and very exciting. I mean, I'm a sucker for novelty. Like I know nothing's that original, but when something at least feels original, that means a lot, because I know that's pretty hard considering nothing's actually original. So that, I don't even agree. I'm not a steampunk, in fact, it was the opposite, because in the early 80s, I was like a futurist, actually. If anything, I wasn't like the Dresden Dolls song, Girl Anachronism, is someone that just doesn't feel like this is their century to really like live. If only they could live in some other century, they would be fully realized. And all that stuff, like with Africa Bambaataa, right? All the hip hop was very futurist. Like Africa Bambaataa liked Kraftwerk, right? Yeah, so like that record, Planet Rock, I believe, was all like Kraftwerk, and the reason they loved Kraftwerk is it was all about robots and computers. And then they would take the breakdown was like, we're automatons. So I was actually a futurist, so really the opposite. So in some ways, it's funny. I've always felt like I'm a bit of a traitor in terms of all these little movements in music, because I'm always like chameleon. Fascinated, but yeah, I'm a chameleon. Like I'm not that. It's like I'm always. Like someone's got to believe it. Maybe that's why I'm also in some ways, aside from the fact I make my own music, I'm a good fit for being a producer engineer, because I'm not that close or that attached to any one thing. And I also see some value in mixing sort of different influences and stuff. So if you want, as long as people mean it, that's what draws me in. It's like, I know it's nuts, but if they really mean it, then we're talking about something that's compelling. That's another thing I think that sometimes situations that are challenging for people bring out interesting things. It's loath we be to completely clean things up too much, or to get too comfortable. I mean, even as much as we all try to be as comfortable as possible, I guess there's a limit. There's a point where it's maybe too comfortable. So we'll have to see. But yeah, like I always feel like the stuff that comes out of the studio and me as an artist or producer shines better. I feel during a crisis. Like I always feel like somehow during the times that are a crisis, I feel more energized, and the stuff that comes out of here, whatever it is that I contribute, or the people that are drawn to me, or whatever it is, or it just seems more vital, or people are more needed. I'm more needed. My perspective, my insanity is more needed and appreciated when there's a crisis out there. People relate to it more.
Sure. Well, so, art in general. I mean, people are always kind of clinging to art in times of trouble or so forth. But now, so you were saying earlier a little bit about the Dresden Dolls. You met them in 2001, and so you already kind of were familiar with what they were doing at this time prior to agreeing to move forward with the recording sessions.
Yeah, well, the first day I met Amanda Palmer, she was brought to the studio by the building manager, and I met her, and then I think the next day she was going to perform in his loft in the building on his piano, and he was going to it was like a brunch. So I met her on a Saturday, and then the next day on a Sunday she was going to perform to some of his friends. I mean, this whole thing is right up her alley. Very bourgeois, very like people like truffles and like it's a perfect setting really for her in an old factory, right? So that's going to play on this piano, and he was like, "You got to be there." And so I was like, "Okay." I mean, I pay, he holds the lease and the rent over my head, and so I was like, "Of course I'm going to go." So within 24 hours of meeting her, I saw probably her first performance in Brooklyn. Period. So it was in this. So I saw Brunch. And I couldn't even stay for that many songs, but I got a sense of what she was doing. And Michael Girard from the Swans, he was my roommate then. So he was actually living at the studio in the upstairs area. And so he was there too. So it's both me and Michael were in the room. So we heard Amanda. So I got a sense of her aesthetics.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's not enough for me somehow, like just hearing piano and voice. Kind of just.
So this was pre Brian joining. So when did you get to see Brian after he joined?
I think she had met Brian the previous Halloween. So I think they met in like 2000. I think they met in 2000 on Halloween, because I think between this brunch in my building, that and 9/11, I believe that they did play in this bad place right by the Port Authority in Midtown Manhattan. Is probably all they knew. And so that was Dresden Dolls, because I think she did mention, well, I'm a busker, I do this stuff, and then I'm kind of thinking I'm sort of starting this band Dresden Dolls with this guy Brian. So I think it was in there, but I don't think it was clear in her mind that it was the only thing she was doing. So she wasn't all vested into this one thing, but she was dabbling in that and having a collaborator. So she invited me to this show at this place called Siberia in Midtown Manhattan. Not good. And I saw her play with Brian, and as usual, it's like sometimes I just I go on two things. I go on communication, sort of people being willing and wanting to like do something special and maybe be a little ambitious in terms of production and work, and feeling that there's a spark there, that there's something there, and I'm pretty loose and easy with taking some chances. If it really rubs me the wrong way, or there's nothing there, or I don't feel like I communicate with people. Actually, that's the biggest red flag. I feel we can't communicate with people, because I got to at least enjoy the work,
Sure, right.
So if we're communicating, we're usually having some fun. I mean, that's really the bottom line. And I felt that was there with them. So it wasn't all about being blown away by their show. Siberia. It kind of wasn't that. It was kind of feeling like there was something there. And then once I started familiarizing myself a little more with the subject matter of her song, It's funny when we were first starting to talk. I forget whether we were actually committed to working or not. But she made a comment that she felt uneasy about some of the songs being so juvenile.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And it's funny. I made a comment to her. I was like, well, maybe I'm going to get lucky, because if that's what you're feeling and you could do it well, I hate to say it, that's not to be mercenary or make it about money or succeeding, but that's one thing that seems to really work, right? Which is like, that's the market that seems most hungry for new music and new artists, is like teenagers, right? So do what you want, but if you're feeling that and you have something substantial that kind of relates on that level, hey, I don't know if I'd look a gift horse in the mouth.
Right.
Maybe
Yes.
that's good. That might be good for you, that you got something there. And like I said, I'm always inclined towards a sort of youth culture thing anyway.
Right.
So
Right.
the
And
idea of appealing
that did work out for them too. So
yeah, and actually when we were like digging for material, I wanted to dig even deeper, because I realized she had all these unfinished songs, like piles of unfinished songs, and
yeah.
it's scattered. I think that's why she actually, part of the reason she wanted a producer, like a producer, was just that she had a lot of scattered songwriting, and she's a dedicated archivist. So she was, even as a teenager, she was archiving the whole thing. So there'd be like boxes, love songs, boxes, film ideas, boxes, all kinds of stuff. So she was really documenting stuff and putting them on cassette. And so I was like, I want to check some of that out. So this is, by the way, what I was said earlier in our discussion, I was saying I like on records 20% of the record being kind of unformed or not fully formed.
Right.
Yeah. So I was I love the fact that there were songs that were old and done, that they'd, in the case of Girl Anachronism, had already even recorded, and but not really properly released. And I was like, no, that's good. That's strong. I like, it was like that one's cooked.
Right.
Ready to go. It's probably going to be super effective. But I also liked this sort of nebulous area where there maybe there's like some, album tracks. I don't care if it's the last song on the record. Maybe there's some stuff we can discover and kind of work on. And I was fascinated by this idea of like stuff written by a teenager. Like, there's something there that we wrote when we were 16. Let's take a look, And so there's the song Bad Habit, which is about cutting herself, right? I was like, oh, I don't even need to hear the song. That song we're doing, that's got to be in there. That's
okay. Weird. All right. Well, look, you know what?
Yeah,
we should get into the album. We should actually discuss it. If you want, I was going to do a kind of a track by track kind of thing. Not every single track. I've selected a few kind of choice cuts, and so maybe we should just kind of get into it. Is that cool?
Sure. Sounds good. Yeah.
Okay. So right off the bat, we have the first song, "Good Day." What I was going to say about it is that so we have we have an introduction, not just to the music, but something I'll touch on repeatedly, I'm sure, as we kind of keep on talking, the dynamics, like I said before, like very quiet to loud dynamics and vice versa throughout the record. Like whose idea was that?
Also, this record was done in the wake of the 90s. Dynamics were a big thing in the 90s. Like, I will say, it's funny that sometime in the aughts, particularly towards the late aughts, dynamics were not a big topic. I mean, I used to have meeting with bands. Like, I would actually meet with a band that maybe was going to work, that was considering working with me. And the main topic was dynamics. Can you do that? They would play me records that they liked, and the whole idea of just things exploding. Like, it was all very, like everyone would say, we want, in the 90s, we want explosive music. But everything's, relative, right? So for it to explode, it's got to come from something that's less explosive, right? So the whole topic of how you can get these very contrasted things. And part of the reason different. It wasn't easy back then. And then I think now that everyone has more home studios, the idea of just gets louder, that seems very simple. It wasn't so simple in 1995 to get kinds of dynamics. So I think at that point, that was still a topic was just, it was a standard kind of in production and record. Also, I've had Brian Viglione, the drummer, the Dresden Dolls drummer. I've had him play in my band sometimes,
Oh
and I've
yeah.
seen him play in other bands, and he's got some dynamics. I mean, he's one of the loudest drummers around, like just like insane,
Right.
the amount of volume that he could put across.
Sure.
And actually, the reason I think he's beneficial a lot of beneficial in my band and beneficial to a couple other bands I see that employed him was that he forces the band to deliver and play on a certain level just because of the dynamics that he imposes on it. Like he comes in and it's like when it's loud, it's pummeling, it's big, and he's big. He has big sounds, big cymbal crashes, big
Right.
tom fills, and it just forces like a lot of big stuff.
Right.
And so I think that between Brian and also just sort of a the way I was really doing things back then, that it just got to have dynamics between that. And also the other thing, which was I realized over the years that I have a bit of a thing I do, which is the sort of middle bridge freak out. And a lot of the songs on Dresden Dolls have that, where it's just like, where it's like, yeah. And then another example with spots where it's really done in the studio, you know. So I think in Good Day, it's like this freak out a little later. There's like instrumental passage where there's
Yep.
more guitar, and then there's like it's the only place where there's like three full pianos of going this kind of thing. And I think that was a thing of mine that I kind of realized over the years. Weirdly enough, I think I'm doing it less now, but you know, that was there in Sonic Youth, like on Death Valley 69, the song that was there. It's like the middle freak out with voices coming from everywhere, you
Yeah.
know. And then
Okay.
there's like a Shadow of a Doubt has that as well. The middle blowout. And I think that was just a thing I like doing. And also some of these instrumental passages didn't have solid ideas. It's like, it's just instrumental and there's no feature, there's no voice. So I don't know. And so I think like on that one, I helped orchestrate, if you will, just like a lot of stuff. So we had this guy, Ad Frank, who was doing the guitar. And so just do a couple more tracks here, and ended up kind of using them all or panning them or whatever. So somewhere in there, so that's some dynamics for you, because that really pumps up.
Yeah.
Also, you know, I'm always down for having it two ways. So at the beginning there, it's super crucial to have the toy piano. That's a big signature of that record and of the Dresden Dolls.
Right.
Generally, it ties into. First of all, they're goths. At least they were back then. Sorry, I know that maybe they don't like hearing that, but they were goths, and so goths are really kind of
Yeah.
obsessed with you with children culture. Forget about youth culture, children, like toddlers, right? There's whole
Right.
songs in there
Well,
that
they're
are about
called dolls
like a
even. So
child.
yeah, of course.
Yeah, so the idea of like a toy piano, like a toy, ding, 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 you know, it's kind of,
Right.
it's on a few songs, so that's already
Yes.
going to be
Yeah.
dynamic. So that's gonna be cool, you know. And then of course Brian doing something very minimal, like, yeah. So he's very dynamic too. So that's your question about dynamics.
Okay. Yeah. But so some of the choices that were made, let's just think about this song specifically for the time being. Like you were saying, like the middle section of the song, like that's kind of a lot of your contribution to the record and to the recording.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe there would be that it's the third member of the band, or fourth, if you will. What is interesting about that song is that there is electric guitar on it.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, yeah, it's funny because I was very also, again, a bit of a producer thing is Amanda asked me. She was not attached with any particular approach. So she was, should this be, because it's kind of rock music, a lot of it. So should there be a lot of guitar on this record? She was like, I don't know. Should there be like only guitar?
Hmm.
Who knows? Like, it's just that there wasn't kind of anything was at least open for discussion. It's
Right.
funny. I actually took the demos that I had on cassette or something, and played to them by myself on guitar. And then I kind of realized that it all sounded much more conventional. if I with guitar, with me playing guitar along to them, it sounded much more conventional, and that it
Okay.
was much more unique with piano. So I was like, I think I just called Amanda the next day after I did a whole little evening of my just playing guitar along to their songs, and I called her the next day and said, you know what, I think not a lot of guitar. The question that did come up eventually was, what about bass? There's no bass in the band, but that's sort of an extra topic. So we did
Okay.
slip in bass on a few songs, but I have to be very careful because I didn't want to, like, you have to be kind of consistent with bottom. So why would there be a big bottom on one song and like none on
Sure.
another?
Especially with the
You have
keys,
to,
because you have both already. You have bass notes on the keys.
yes, so you can get away with maybe not bass. So if you're going to add bass on something, maybe it might be overkill if it's low keys on the piano plus the bass, plus we have to be careful. So that topic did come up about bass, like the song Gravity, for instance,
Okay.
does have bass. But
Hmm.
so guitar was this sort of dangling thing where like I didn't want to kibosh the idea completely. I was a little down on really adding a lot of signature rockism on guitar, even though it's a rock record. I thought that what's unique is if we can get away with it without using guitar. But
Right,
that's
right.
a song. Interestingly enough, it's the opener, and the Ada's guitar. So
Hmm.
there, and we were judicious about it, and also that contributed a lot to dynamics because the guitar, as I recall, is not at one level the whole time. So when it really works, it's up. So
Sure.
that also
Right.
probably adds a lot of punch.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, considering like how I remember it, because I'm not totally familiar with it, but I've been listening to it obviously a lot the past couple of weeks. So, well, that's
But
great.
to be fair, can you
I'm
just
sorry.
play me the front of the song?
Yeah, sure. Oh, I hate that loop, that out of time loop.
Okay, that's the actual recording.
That's the record on digital. Yeah.
Wow, it really has a like an old like Victrola, like speeding up and slowing down kind of quality, like a watery quality.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
But
know
you
how
know
you
what's
heard it, but yeah, I mean, it does have that. I mean, it has like that fake vinyl crackle going on, and then the break where it keeps on like looping, where it sounds like a broken record. I'm just like, this must have driven vinyl record fans insane when they first heard it, like thinking it was like just a
I'm
fuck
glad I
up.
asked you. I remember that I remember that there was toy piano at the beginning. But I completely forgotten about the record thing. Dun, 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 like it
Right.
skips,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I completely forgot about it because that theme is also on a section of Coin Operated Boy. Coin
Yes.
Operated Boy also has a track skipping moment
Right.
um, a little further in. And this was now I remember that we added the vinyl crackle. Now I forgot about that, so I'm glad
Right.
I asked you to play that.
Did
But yeah,
that
and then
make did that
it's funny
make
that's
customers go insane? Where like people complaining that it's just like, oh, I bought the CD and it doesn't fucking work. Like right off the jump, it like skips.
no one. I never heard any
Okay,
complaints.
all right. Just curious.
But wow, it's interesting. I think that using the crackling was a little is either contentious or I was a little skeptical of it at first.
Hmm.
Uh, Maybe because I was thinking it was kind of getting in the way, or there was some kind of thing where I didn't know. Well, where does it stop? If the crackles in, we take it out, and
Right.
I can get pretty precious. I can get precious about intros. It's funny, like the thing that I put extra thought on in general is I'm always looking for distinctive fronts and ends. Not every song can have a distinctive front or end, but I'm always loath of too many songs starting the same way. So sometimes I do point that out to people. Oh, a third song that just starts with just the drums, right? So I'll point that out to people. Sometimes people don't notice because they're so involved with thinking about the body of the song, and I tend to think about the fronts a little bit more than the
Sure.
ends too, because sometimes it's the end. It's like, well,
Because
what
then
happens at the end? Does it
sequencing
fade
too,
away?
like
Does it,
putting all together on a
is
record. It's just like, well, okay, we got 3 or 4 songs in a row that start off with drums. Like, come on, like that's gonna be a little weird.
yeah, it's so that's and then when it has to be, I might even point out, okay, but by the way, maybe these shouldn't be near each other or something, So,
Right. Yeah.
so I think about that. So the idea of extra craft going into the intro of a Good Day, um, makes sense, and also has that very, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a sort of, there's a lot of like middle class existential crisis that goes on in this record.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like in that is sort of making fun of, I had a productive day because I learned how to play croquet. I picked up croquet today and I'm on fire, right? That's one of the lyrics, I think. Right. So I always thought that was kind of cute or whatever, but it's definitely like self-aware of the privilege a bit, and this sort of existential crisis really of middle class,
Right.
like the song Perfect Fit was like, which is later on the record, is like, am I does anyone even need my skills? Like, what do I even contribute with? I'm good at this or I'm good at that, and how much value? And yes, it has value, and being an artist has a lot of value, but this kind of inner conflict about like real work and things, people, really contributing to society or not, or how can I? But there's a lot of this middle class like crisis in there, and so
because
this middle class aware.
I think it had a lot to do with her busking, like that whole aspect that she could actually create a lot of her, like basically generate her living off of a lot of busking, which is essentially, I mean, it's the next. I'm not saying this disparagingly, because I appreciate people that busk. I really, really do. I think that that's an admirable thing, that you go out there and you do something to earn your keep. Like, like people that are out panhandling and just out there with cups, and it happens everywhere now. It's that annoys me to a degree, because I always used to give my money to those people, but now I'm just like, okay, wait, there's one on every corner, and all you guys are just doing is sitting out here with a sign. Like, at least somebody is out there being productive and like doing something, offering you something and contributing something to society, to kind of earn that money, and she did very well with it, at the same time. So I think that's admirable, and I think that's kind of what that song implies a little bit, is this like this like I think she went on to do this too, like further on, that like in her career, like with that book she wrote and stuff about the I forget what it's called now, like
The Art of Asking.
The Art of Asking, right. So it's just like coming to grips with the idea that it's okay to ask people for money, especially if you're offering something in return. It's not like you're just asking and that's it. You're contributing something, and I appreciate that, actually.
Yeah, and I also appreciate it being kind of exposed and being open about it, and
Right.
so she has this existential crisis, but also a lot of stuff that people can relate to. Like if you look at the Dresden Dolls fan base, it's, well, for one thing, it's at least in New York City, a lot of her fan base seem to be from outside the city, right? They seem to be, it's like suburban kids. Actually, it's funny that the label that they ended up signing with, so funny, was Roadrunner. And I remember Roadrunner being a label that used to really put out Long Island bands of all these sort of
and like metal
gothic
stuff too, and hardcore, right? Like a lot of like heavy stuff.
Yeah, hard, yeah, and then eventually very metal, like Lamb of God kind of stuff. But there was a time, like hardcore bands and stuff, but it was all this sort of disaffected, lost middle class youth. I kind of saw that. So then when Dresden Dolls got signed to Roadrunner, I was like, oh wow, that's really the demographic. Yeah, it's funny because I have this book, the Dresden.
Yeah, I've been looking for that, and it's been so hard to find.
Yeah, so I have anyway, I kept it here in case I need to remind myself any of the lyrics, because all the lyrics printed out. It's really pretty great book with a lot of little collage-y.
Yeah, kind of like the CD artwork, right?
Yeah, like all I mean, there's definitely such a strong like aesthetic of low production, like hear the lyrics to Girl Anachronism, like, you know, done on a broken typewriter, just like you have on the song that we were just listening to, like a broken turntable or a broken disc that's skipping.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like this like broken old technology.
I'm gonna have to try to
Yeah.
buy that at some point. I'll have to if I come across it, I'm gonna pick it up. But I had a really hard time finding that. I mean, I knew I could have ordered it online, but I was trying to not order it online, and yeah, it
Yeah.
didn't work out. So let's move on to the next song. I was wanting to do Girl Anachronism. So Girl
Cool.
Anachronism. I had to look up the word because I wasn't too familiar with it. The definition of anachronism is a thing belonging or appropriate to a period other than that in which it exists, especially a thing that is conspicuously old-fashioned. So considering the lyrics of the song, and you were kind of mentioning it yourself, was that I don't see the title and the content. I don't see like the title kind of like reflecting the content, the lyrical content of the song too much, or it's like it's a little uneven. Um, unless it's just Amanda's sentiment of her feeling out of place, which I think is totally common. I know I experienced that myself. I know I see that with my wife. She's actually feels very much like that.
Oh, okay.
But what I want to ask you is, do you feel BC Studios and is anachronactis? I can't even pronounce it now. Anachronat. I can't pronounce it.
Anachronistic.
Anachronistic.
Not to be mistaken for anarchism, but yeah.
Yes.
Because some of these crust punks of Boston would think, oh, girl anarchism, because they didn't know the word,
Right.
so they would mistake it.
Okay.
But
I
hold on,
that.
doesn't she say, "I do not belong to this century"? Hold on.
She may, yeah, that might be there, but I mean, that's like one line. If you read all of the verses, it's just like, it's all of these weird, I don't know, I don't want to say faults necessarily, but just like the idea of let's like, you know, you look at me and I have this and I'm like, you know, broken or bruised and this is this and, you know, and I'm just like,
And
it
then I
doesn't,
like the part about like it's like, please excuse her the day. It's just the way the medication makes her.
right,
There's that.
right. Yeah, but
Right.
that doesn't say, but to see something like that, it doesn't necessarily say anything about being out of place in time. I understand the sentiment, but I don't think that it's necessarily anachronistic.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. I mean, I just never thought of that, and you're right. I think that what the title implies is that that's the source of all these problems, right? It's
Sure.
and what I always thought that was strong about what I always thought it was strong about that song was at this point in an artist's career they have to really define themselves, and there is something to be said for the I am songs, right? Like I even thought like Madonna, I am a material girl, right? Like it's this self-defining. So if you think of Amanda's Girl Anachronism is sort of the same kind of vehicle as Material Girl was for Madonna, or Iron Man was for like Ozzy or something. You know, it's like this sort of defining. I guess I need something like that, right? I think that this sort of self-defining thing was actually kind of really important for her, and it's interesting how that needs to be. I mean, I know it's a little bit of this premise is a bit nuts, I know, but it seems like there are artists that put early in their career, songwriters that put some like really defining song that's self-reflecting and that really captures in a nutshell what they're about and what they're gonna be about for like a while.
Right.
And I kind of call them the I am songs, right? So I am the Girl Anachronism. I am a material girl, you know. It's funny though, because the Dresden Dolls themselves never gave me the impression of being. It's funny, they were always uncomfortable with even being lumped in with goths or goth culture like at all. That's supposedly why Amanda came up with the term punk cabaret, because she was so mortified, or she was afraid of being lumped in with like gothic
Right.
stuff, and I never heard the word steampunk come out of her mouth. Right. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out about the girl anachronism. But I think that was part of the idea of her being misfit with the modern world, and um, and just on a different wavelength. And maybe that the thinking is that, this fiction that maybe in some other century that maybe she wouldn't be considered,
Sure. Yeah. But no, but what
mentally
about
ill.
BC? What about BC Studios? Is that anachronistic? Anachronistic? Oh, fucking Christ, I can't pronounce that word.
Anachronistic.
Anachronistic. Yes. BC Studios.
Well,
Anachronistic.
yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's fun. I'm also contradictory myself, because like I said, there was a minute there where I was kind of futurist. Um,
Right.
a lot of the hip hop, like I said, was futurist,
At
really.
that time, it was.
And
I mean, that was completely innovative. I mean, it was. You guys were
yeah,
creating something new.
and even the title of the album that Rocket is on, Future Shock. So that was
Mm-hmm.
the whole idea. And then, like I said, and I used to love Kraftwerk in 1977. I loved Kraftwerk, and that song, which a lot of my graffiti writing friends, we would play that on the subway. We would play Trans Europe Express on the friggin' like train, like on a boombox, as we were like tagging up.
Yeah.
But yeah, the BC studio, which by the way came later, because the studio when I first started it was called OAO, which
Right.
stood for Operation All Out,
Correct.
which was taken from a William Burroughs book. And I had to change the name at some point after Rocket, because Bill Laswell, we sort of split up, and he wanted to
Yeah.
take, and it just seemed like I needed a new name. And I actually did not love the BC, but all the names that people were suggesting, a lot of people suggesting names, and all of it was just awful. No, we're not calling it Sound Mecca. That's not going to happen. So I was like, okay. And then I was like, and then it occurred to me, you know what? Just keep it simple. BC. And what's funny is BC was supposed to, and you're right about being a bit of an anachronism, is BC was supposed to sound like, it was actually nothing. I know there was a lot of like Sonic Youth actually called my studio Before Christ Studio on one of the records, I guess on Evol. Because I was explaining to them the name change, and I was like, well, I'm calling it BC because it's kind of like my name, BC, but then it's also like Before Christ. And then Thurston was like, oh my God, Before Christ, that's cool. And so then that's on some record, Before Christ Studios. And of course I didn't object. I'm like, sure, whatever. But that's not really what I meant. It was no comment on Christ at all.
Sure.
What it was if I could have called it Before Common Era, that's what I meant. I meant before Common Era. So I meant before this modern world, because I was personally, and yeah, maybe I guess I'm a bit of a boy anachronism, because I was fascinated by the 150,000 years before like any of this modern stuff that we can talk about, whether it's religion or agriculture or anything. So I kind of like I felt like that was like, I want to sort of suggest like there was something primal about what can happen, in these walls, that it was somehow that's something I related to, that it's not about like current trends, although yeah, it kind of is, but that there was something as a reminder. And then just to be stupid, just to say that it was really about Before Common Era and not Christ. The logo, which again, embarrassing, the logo that was on some of the track sheets was a dinosaur. I can't believe I actually got someone to design this for me. Like, I actually said, hey, can you draw me like a dinosaur holding a microphone? Thanks. $50 or a ticket to dinner or something. So I actually had there on some of the track sheets for records until I got embarrassed by that and realized get rid of that stupid thing. It was like a Tyrannosaurus Rex with a microphone. So stupid. But yeah, so that's what I meant. I meant just like old, even pre-human,
Sure.
pre-language.
Okay. Right.
I was very into like the idea of pre-language, of music being like the original language. Or the first language, first mode of communication and expression.
Right. Yeah. All right. Listen, we're actually kind of running out of time, so I'm going to skip a few songs. And
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, but I just want to be mindful of your time. I don't want to be here for hours, but I want to skip down to one song that I thought was fairly important, Bad Habit. You mentioned it a little bit earlier. Seems fairly obvious to be depiction of a cutter. But the term bad habit, I was just like, I don't imagine you have any studio bad habits, do you?
Well, I can get pretty hopped up on the old caffeine.
That's not a
Um,
bad habit, I don't think.
no, but I mean, I feel I'm a bit of an abuser of it. I'm all about trying to have the right habits in the studio. So
Right.
I have to keep it as my job to be efficient. So everything in my mind that happens in the studio is uh, an an understood and intentional part of, I think, our good practices. Like, for instance, I even factor in that when people arrive, we need to shoot the shit a little. So I also factor in that the first session, if it's the first session in the month, like maybe the holidays go by and so we don't work or people are away and then they come back. So it's been a while that, you can't just jump right into work. You got like, you know, update each other on your lives a little bit or something. There's something there where it's like the second day, maybe we're going to jump right into work, like right away. I can go, okay, so I was listening a little bit before this and boom, 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 boom. So everything, even the shooting the shit is kind of worked in my mind as of something that's important and should happen and that I just factor in. So it's
Mm,
all about good habits in the studio. And I never mix alcohol and any kind of music making. I don't think I ever have. Like, I don't think
okay.
one in my life I sat down to write a song and even had a beer. I've never played a show and had even a beer. After the show, that's a different story. But
Sure.
it's just that there's nothing about alcohol that seems like it would make better music for me, or like, because the thing for me that I struggle with music is, if anything, is like maintaining some sense of the cognizant, you know um like the rational, the rational functioning part of the brain. That's
Sure.
what I struggle to hold on to, because it's very easy for me to get lost. Even, it's funny because I don't meditate, right? And so I have friends that are skeptical of mine not meditating. They're like, it'd be probably could be pretty good for you, and I just don't. But occasionally a friend of mine will see me work in the studio, particularly with mixing, and go, I get it. I get why you don't meditate, because you kind of get some of the benefits, because I do deep listen, right? So
Sure.
even if I'm mixing anything, even some goofy shit, I'm still deep listening, and I'm still kind of getting lost in there.
Right.
So if anything, I struggle to maintain my sense of like, well, I got to keep that rational self still kind of tethered in there, because without that, who the fuck knows? We'll never get done, or I'll go on
Yeah.
tangents. So I
Wild.
gotta. So alcohol is not in the service of keeping the rational self like tethered. So I never
Right.
touch it during any music creation at all.
Okay. Well, that's good. But so what I was going to ask is like, well, so let's turn this around then. If you don't have any bad habits, like, what are some of the best practices you can offer as suggestions to the budding engineer or the band in the studio?
Well, there might be different suggestions actually with the budding engineer. Well, what I've often heard, this might almost just be the way it goes now, but what I've heard in the past is ambitious engineers or producers, young, just starting out, really feel that they need like the one project um to devote themselves to really work, and they kind of invest in like a project very intentionally.
Hmm.
um Maybe it's just me, but I've often felt like I am the worst judge of that. Even with Dresden Dolls, I was the worst judge. I never in a million years would have thought that would have gone well. You know, um, all of that stuff. So the stuff that I thought was going to do well kind of floundered or didn't particularly do well, and then the stuff I thought was never had a chance or wasn't even maybe that good, but I knew I made it as good as it needed to be or could be or should be or any of this stuff. And I know I gave it something, but I'm
Hmm.
aware of its deficiencies, but then no one can hears it and it actually works and people love it or something. So it's like you can't really tell. So with engineers, I would be like, just do stuff. Don't focus so much on like making it an oeuvre of yourself as a recording engineer. Give it something. Absolutely do as much as you can of making it a great piece of work, but don't let that bog you down, because you just don't know. And a lot of what's going to make the magic happen is what the artist does on their own, separately from the record.
Right.
So, the record is only as good as the person going out there. And, like, even if you think of the Dresden Dolls, and it's like this is part of the record. The part of the record is the artwork and the sensibility of what they're doing. And that's sort of like, people hear the music and then they associate it with that like cup with the baby doll's face, So sometimes even like, it's just like music itself is you're pulling together these different art forms, like lyrics. That's like poetry, right? Like, I'm not even a good lyricist, and I have lyrics in my songs. I do the best I can. That's like a separate art form, really. So, but yet music combines the two, and I still think it's very strange to even have artwork. I still think it's kind of odd, but I don't know. I guess that's part of the record, and it really informs the music. I think context is absolutely gigantic. So my point is like, as an engineer, producer, like if you're hoping that a band's going to take it over some finish, and I'm not like Albini, honestly. I don't bemoan people trying to be successful. I think it's all a big mess of like trying to be successful, trying to do something good, being true to yourself, pleasing others. I mean, it's a big friggin' mess. Anyone thinks that they're pure, can be pure in that. I think it's a bit of a self-narrative that you're saying. So someone says, I want to succeed. That's okay. I care more about whether the quality of their work in their succeeding. But yeah, there's too many factors, and it's not all just about you. So take some chances with artists, and maybe more than less. So prioritize. Don't get down into details and rabbit holes that in the big picture might not really even help the artist. Slip in some details, sure, along the way, but don't let it bog you down. As far as bands, I don't know. Don't play too often in your local town. That's the other thing that happens. I see these bands that are just starting, are just like ready to play as much as possible. Well, why else have a band, right? Unless you're like playing as much as possible. And then I just see their shows getting worse and worse and worse. They're playing worse places. They're playing with worse other bands.
Right.
I don't know what to tell them, but just don't focus so much on oversaturating and playing live. And recording is a good thing, So if you're not going to record, if you're not going to play that much, which I think is kind of smart, also stretch out as a recording artist and get some recordings in. I also would suggest not to self-record so much. I know I would say that. Come into the recording studio and spend a bunch of money, but I also do think that sometimes people like they do too many demos, or they demo something too well. Me, I have a whole system, right? When I demo a song, all that is off. I record it in the simplest, most straightforward way. I almost deliberately record demo ideas in ways that could never, ever be used. So if I'm doing my guitar, it's direct. It's not even through an amp. So I'm not even attempting quality. It's a demo, period. It's a sketch pad. It's a sketch pad. And I think it's too easy for people now to like get sidetracked into, because they have home studios, right? So they spend money on having a home studio. So then they got to like get to really learn how to use it.
Right.
I think you're better off not learning how to use it. Maybe put it in the closet. That's my opinion. But then when you do it like you mean it.
Right.
And then, yeah. So, and when are you going to do it like you mean it? Maybe once a year, right? So then I guess that home studio is just laying fallow there rather than something you were like using every day. So I think I think we're getting into a weird moment, with music. And be careful about some of the options that people can have that can be maybe not productive.
Yeah. Okay. Let's skip to another song. Slide. So this song, I don't really like this song. I find it exceptionally creepy. But there's that insane intensity near the end of the song. It gets really, really blown out. Like, do you recall that at all in the sessions? You
Wow,
remember? Do you
yeah,
know what happened there?
yeah. Thanks for reminding me about this. It's funny because it does have that pedophilia theme.
Yeah.
The Orange Man. I mean,
Right.
creepy as fuck, right?
Yeah. Very
Um,
disturbing.
and not Trump. And then there's and it's just like that song "Missed Me," right? The third song in the record, "Missed Me," is also
Yes.
about pedophilia. It's also about an older man, and again, conflicting feelings, right? "Missed Me" has that conflicting feelings of a woman in her middle teens, just realizing, yes, she has sexual power.
Right. Yeah.
That's I well, I don't know that experience, right? But I could imagine, and I trust from others that have told me that that's a shocking thing where you suddenly have control, but you're also a victim. You know, you're also like you're
Right.
also prey, but then you also have power, and that's also can be very confusing. So that's all
Hmm.
over that song. This like tortured conflict about this sexual power, and so Slide also. I remember from Amanda describing it, the title and the song and the slide of it is was slide from innocence, from sexual innocence
Yeah.
of a young person, and then the orange man that's going to make promises or make like so it's fucking about pedophilia. But then the song at the end um, was it's really funny because I record. Remember, did I mention X Models somehow in our conversation?
No,
We
we
did.
haven't talked about
Yeah.
X models.
Well,
Yeah. No.
the song the band X Model. That's another band that's very pummeling and very distorted. And I remember with that band X Models that were sort of like this renewed like no wave kind of thing that their thing. And I was recording them at the same. I was mixing them at the same time as Dresden Dolls. So X Models 1 week, Dresden Dolls the next week. I remember X Models. One thing they told me is the frequencies have to be utter like the high frequencies, the high overtones and have to be piercing and painful. We want pain to come out from the frequencies of this. So we pushed and pushed in the mixing, even in the mastering, as most painful as possible. And part
Okay.
of what we did, which I don't usually do, I don't normally like maybe 4 times really. So once a decade, really, do I really go for distort an entire mix that I run the entire mix through like preamps, just almost like they would like be distortion things. This other record I did fairly recently called by this band Upper Wild, a fantastic band, Upper Wilds. Um, we messed with distorting the mixes, but I told them to we did, but I was like, you know what? I think because they were going to use a mastering person, Sarah Register, the mastering person, she likes doing that. She likes applying a bit of saturation to mixes. I was like, you know what? She likes doing that. She's good at it. I think we should do the mixes, maybe preview what they would sound like distorted, but maybe that mastering person should do it. So it's a rare thing for me to do. But I was doing it with X Models, like running. We would mix and then we'd run it through like these kind of crappy preamp. We had Soundcraft sideboard and just redlining that shit, right?
Hmm.
And so Amanda at the end of that song was kind of like, we need things and we need guitars or blah blah blah. And I was like, because I'd been doing it all week. What if we ran just the end, the whole thing, just like slam red line completely, like in the red blinking lights just on
Right.
through these preamps, and then like find a way back and put it so and leveling it out, because it was basically adding like 25 dB to the final mix at the end and then splicing it on. And that might be some of the dynamics that you noticed on this record. But
Oh yeah.
I'm so glad you noticed that at the end, that was this hilarious thing that really just worked. That was like sort of thanks to X Models. So that was around when we were finishing the mixing of Dresden Dolls. But yeah, that's what happens at the end of the Orange Man song, Slide.
Oh, okay. So it was mostly just like a mixing thing. It wasn't necessarily like an instrumentation, something in the studio that was recorded that way.
No, and it also shows how much overtones, because it was definitely nice, better, more musical. The distortion was more musical than if we had just used distortion pedals. That's
Right.
clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
But all the overtones that you're hearing of like it's like piano. So really, it's actually kind of beautiful, right? Because there's so many. Piano's got all these complex overtones, right? It's got like each hammer has like 3 strings. three strings that are not perfectly in tune, can't be perfectly in tune. There's no perfection in the universe, right? So there are these three that are just like beating against each other. That's why piano has this sort of glow to it. And you take whatever that beating is and you ran it through this thing that's also from that beating going to create like a whole stack of harmonics. It's going to be sonically pretty exciting. And so that's what happens at the end of that. We were like laughing. She thought, wow, it sounds like Marshalls. Sounds like double Marshall. Sounds like Helmet. So it was like, wow, we have a little helmet here at the end of the Dresden Dolls song.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I mean, like, it definitely stood out to me. I was just like, holy shit, because it literally clipped. I think it was like literally like listening in like earbuds, and I was just like, this hurts.
So funny. Yeah, that's totally what we were going for in that one thing. In a bit of a, that's what's nice. That's what's nice about having a few, like, I'm not into throwaway songs. Like I'm not into throwing a song away ever. It's, you work on it, should exist. But there's something nice about having these like B songs that you don't have to be so precious with.
Sure.
That you could kind of play around a little and try something different and out of the box and just kind of fun, and then just go and maybe laugh a little, because I think me, Amanda, and Brian, I think we laughed a little bit about that ending at the end of Slide, and we thought it was funny. Yeah. It's funny, about just quick on the topic of distortion. I actually thought that one of the best choices I made, so simple, one of the best choices I made on that record, because I think I made the choice. It's not something they've asked me for. Is the distortion that's added on Girl Anachronism on the voice, because it's immediately arresting, and it's interesting after the sort of nicey nice da 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 of like Good Day. I picked up croquet today, and then it's like this anger, right, that comes in on the voice. It's got this angsty quality that comes through with the distortion of the voice on. So when I hear the record from Good Day, which is a bit of a long song, and then going to the build up and then the voice entering of Girl Anachronism, I find it very, very summoning, very startling, and arresting is the word I was looking for.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, for sure. Now, speaking again, you were just mentioning how kind of joyful and how pleasant that experience was mixing Slide and kind of coming to that conclusion. We're going to skip to the last song, Truce. So the song Truce itself, it's kind of like a long-winded take on a bad breakup, essentially. Like, lyrically, it's kind of a little almost immature. You can kind of tell maybe it's one of those songs that she had written a long time ago. Let's see, there's just a lot of words in this all for saying something fairly simple and something every adult has most likely experienced. The difficulty of separating and then having to try to stake claim to places where you hope not to run into that person. In closing, I imagine, or at least hope, that your experience making this record with the Dresden Dolls ended harmoniously.
Yeah, it ended harmoniously. I felt a little weird by it got tortuous, really, in a way.
Yeah,
it was long. We had a lot of joyful moments, and it was long, and I had to rethink about whether I wanted to go that far into a rabbit hole. Because one of the reasons I suggested we talk about this record is because it was the last record really of this era of really being like an all-in, get super involved with the band production. And I feel that there are records I've done more recently that touch on that sort of involvement, but not quite on that level. So I do parts of those kinds of involvements, parts of that with different bands. Some it's more of the mixing, some it's more like I realized I did get very involved with the vocal production, or some more or less on arrangements. But with Dresden Dolls, it was everything and all. But it's Truce was also a very it's a very experimental song in a way. There's a lot of touches there. There's some part, which is one thing I thought was worth mentioning, is that there are these, I guess I did mention it, there are a lot of breaks, instrumental breaks on the record where we stretch out with ideas and stuff. And on this one, for instance, there's a lot of string arrangements, right? So I had this idea of like almost with like sampling, like a sampling aesthetic, where I wanted some string parts to sound flown in. And I remember we did this weird process because there's a string quartet on that song. So when you have a string quartet, usually deal with one person. That's a common thing, right? So you have one person that's sort of the leader of the quartet, and that they communicate things that the artist or the producer want to the quartet, and they handle the arrangement, they handle like harmonies and stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
they kind of make it happen. And so I settled on something that was like a descending line, and I was like something like like a dripping, and I was like, if the strings could do something like that, and so, but I don't want it to be in time. So and I was still on tape, so I'm not sure I really even had like that efficient a sampler, certainly not a stereo or multi-track sampler. So I was like, so the players aren't going to listen to the music, and then I think it's like one of us will be able to listen. I forgot exactly how it worked, but we were going to the key was that the players were not going to hear the music, and we would cue the director to then signal them, and they would do it sort of in sort of an almost arbitrary place. Or that's right, even the director didn't hear it, so we would cue the director, so we'd be listening and we would say something like go or something, and then the director would just direct them to play the figure, but it wasn't clear where it was. And then we did like 3 takes of this, so they're in different places. So there's a lot of experimental stuff.
Huh.
And then actually there's some, you'd have to find out where that is, but I remember it was pretty clear that there was a few of these descending lines. I would pan them, and so we got pretty experimental. Then there was a spot somewhere in there, like a break, and if you listen, it's very quiet, where I thought we were kind of fucked, because I had the string quartet set up. Suddenly it started, my place is a little noisy, and it started pouring torrential rain happening outside, and you could hear some dripping, like it was actually coming through the mics. You could hear some dripping in the back, like on a pipe or something, on some pipes, and there was like some drips on some pipes, and I was like, oh fuck! I was like, man, I'm gonna have to move them. I'm gonna have to move, because there's a quieter option, right? There's a little other part of the room, the other room. It's like, oh, I'm gonna have to move them all the mics. What a fucking hassle it's gonna be. And then it just occurred to me, I was like, you know what? Maybe it's not so bad if there's some dripping in the background, So, and then I realized, wow, I think it's kind of adds to like the creepy mood, because I know the opposite. I know the opposite of trying to put water sounds into something. Like when people go, oh, should sound like maybe there's a faucet dripping, or a faucet on, or maybe it's some sounds of like some rain, or some running water, and adding those sounds and making them sound like water always seems super hard. And so the idea that we had dripping that actually sounded like dripping, I was like, maybe that's good. So there's that on that song. The thing that I like about that song, really, in a way, is actual reference to places. There's a reference to a cafe in Harvard Square called Cafe Pamplona.
Yeah.
And that's in there. So, and actually, it's funny because there was a day, for some reason, I was up in Boston. I was like, I need to go to the cafe, so I need to go to Cafe Pamplona, and I went and I had a coffee. And but that was the place where they would kind of go and kind of hang out, I guess, while she was busking, because it was right there right near Harvard Yard.
Yeah, I have a feeling that she actually even worked there a little bit every now and then.
Yeah, I think so. And there was, I think that somewhere in all this record, I think they mentioned Toscanini's. Yeah, I think that was an ice cream shop where a lot of the gothy buskers would work.
Right. Okay.
But anyway, so I really liked that she was mentioning places, because that's always the thing, is making a recording feel like it's of a place and time. And sometimes it can be corny stuff, right? Like I have all this, if you look at my music videos, I got songs about Gowanus. The word Gowanus is in there, right? So I have Save Sludgy the Whale of Gowanus, right? That's a song on one of the BC 35 records, and that's a music video. So it's Gowanus. We shoot it by the Gowanus. And then I have a song on the new record, Feral Myths, right? It's A Storm Called Ida, right? So it's us walking around Gowanus after a storm.
The new album, Feral Myths.
There you go. It's the second.
Yeah.
This is the second song on there. So definitely there's a sense of place, right? So that's another device in music that I kind of like, of something, like even when I hear like really old stuff, I think, oh, it's 60s music, but it's from the Bay Area. That impacts my thing. Or I listen to the Doors, like L.A. or something. Or I listen to
Oh, yeah.
some krautrock, and I think, oh, interesting. So I think place
Right.
and time, these are cool things to place in music. So Slide has that. So I love that she mentions, and it's not corny, I think, the way it's presented there. Also, I like on the song Jeep Song, right? So Jeep Song, another song on the record that has a big sense of place. And,
Right.
and it's so cool, really, in a way. It's like every exit has a narrative. Wow, that's great for a song, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she doesn't explore that exactly, like, oh, this exit was this or that, but like every exit, because I definitely have that in New York when I'm like, oh wow, it's like, I mean, I was on a street last night, West 24th Street, where I realized so much of my life had happened on those, so many significant things that happened on West 24th Street. So I'm always thinking about that stuff. How amazing to see bits of your own history in a place and stuff. It's kind of it's a bit of a mind fuck, and kind of cool. It's funny. Anytime I drive into Boston, and I'm seeing, I often think of the song Jeep Song, because I think of the exits, and I'm like, oh, what, each exit is a heartbreak. Each exit represents a disappointment.
Right. You're looking for a
So that's
96
kind of cool.
Cherokee.
Ah, yeah, take that Cherokee right off the
It's just like,
trail of
is that Amanda's
tears.
ex-boyfriend driving around over there? Could that be him?
And are you looking for a blue Volvo? Right,
Right. Yeah, she'd
that
be
was
in the
her
blue
car. It
Volvo.
was a
Yeah.
blue Volvo, yeah, which I
Right.
saw. I saw
Yeah.
that was the car they were driving on their way down from Boston.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, I'm sure that's a real thing.
Yeah,
All right. Well, so
yeah.
I think we've wrapped it up for the record. Just as a kind of a closing sentiment, I was curious actually. I've heard so much about, all your work and the bands you've worked with in the past and so forth, and like, we were even talking about one of them now, the Dresden Dolls. Who like what have you been doing lately in the studio? Like who are some of the bands that you've worked with like most recently?
I would say that I'm so grateful to work with the band Clone,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, I would say right now well, Clone we just finished, and then there's the band the Resistance Company, which I'm right in the middle of, and for different reasons. So those two really have. So for instance, Clone, which they're not really shoegazer, but they really was exploring a lot of layers, right? So a lot of guitars,
Mm-hmm.
and then some synth, and then effects on the vocals, and then analog effects, uh, effect delays and stuff on vocals and stuff, and very kind of intense mixing. And so also some songs, there were some of these stretch out in the studio songs, which I like that they tried to salvage because they were tough. They were tough. It was like, wow, the bridge, and as it work and go to the thing. So it's really because I'm a bit of an arranger in the back of my mind. I don't think I need to be involved in arranging a lot, but when we do go there, and I am involved in arranging, and I'm trying to help figure better arrangements for things, it's a happy place. I enjoy it, and I also enjoy making vocal composites of vocals. So that band had a lot of vocals. So it was a lot about like, um, you know, examining, should it come from here, or like, how is it better, or vocal treatments and stuff.
Mm.
All that is just, I like talking about. So I like talking about vocal production a lot. And so that record Clone has it. Similarly, also with Resistance Company, there was a lot of writing the songs here. So even I had some input on, because the Resistance Company are also political allies. They donate their services as a band playing outside in support of resistance movements. So they were playing outside of the, or let's say near the homes of some Supreme Court justices in D.C., and at some protests, some Extinction Rebellion protests.
Hmm.
They have battery powered amps and stuff, and then drums. And they supported us here in Gowanus, where we had an action. We'll do a bit of a protest outside this public hearing on the rezoning of Gowanus. So I got them to come and play, and they did some of their environmental material, and I sang with them. Vote no, Gowanus rezone. Vote no, Gowanus rezone, and this kind of stuff, right? So anyway, as a sort of barter, ended up recording their record, and then it's mostly political. And so, as a fellow activist, I was like really honored, and I am honored to have helped. Also, even with lyrics and stuff. So that's an example of like I'm not a producer on like every aspect of everything. Unlike the Dresden Dolls, where I felt I really kind of got in on everything. Weirdly enough, except lyrics with Dresden Dolls. So in this band, it's really a lot of stuff with lyrics. I even came up with the title, "A Land Defiled." Weirdly enough, that I ended up suggesting. That's like, well, why don't you say like a land defiled in that spot? And then it was like, oh, actually, that's pretty good, right? Because at the end of the chorus is like, okay, maybe that should be the title of the album, the title of the song. So there's that. The Resistance Company. I should also mention White Suns, SUNS, that they're like kind of post-rock sun, like very few lyrics, and kind of screamy and really buried. But that was a band where they had like just all kinds of stuff, like amps like blowing up and like triggers on the drums and stuff feeding back, and like room mics, and just a lot kind of like an X Models kind of thing, like that the Oneida member used to be, like a bit of like that, just like heavy, kind of crazy, but kind of experimental and pummeling. And you know, so it's funny. Excuse me.
Are these New York bands?
Everyone I mentioned is New York, yes.
Okay.
And so actually, it's funny with those three. Those are kind of poles. Like the Resistance Company is kind of 90s. It's like it's almost like Soundgarden a little bit or something like that, right? And then Clone is a little more like shoegazy, like sort of loves the 80s a bit, kind of vibe. Sure. I think that they're a little like A Place to Bury Strangers or something. And then White Suns is, I don't know what it is. I guess it's like a sort of wave noise revival, definitely noise.
Okay.
So cool. You know, I feel quite good about it. I like having different kinds of things happen. It really helps because weirdly enough, I do learn from one thing and, you know, like, hey, you know what? Maybe we could. And it's fucking comes from like something I did like earlier in the week or something. Shit, it's not bad to have extra like experience to draw on and stuff.
Yeah,
you know?
a lot of influencing going on. A lot of influences kind of coming from all around.
That's why I do like framing the studio as a little bit of a community center.
Right.
For a few different aspects. I do like framing some of these small businesses, just in all these arguments we have about how to use our resources in an urban environment, is that some of these things like record stores are a bit of a community center, right? They're important for people coming together. People put up flyers. You know, they're kind of curated. So like the store owner might put stuff on the wall that they might be there's conversations that happen. I know from going on tour, I tend to poke into record stores when I have extra time, try to sell them a record, but then inevitably I have a conversation about the show I'm doing, or someone goes, oh yeah, I know that band.
Sure.
Blah, blah, blah. And then there's like an Instagram photo, and then we're kind of, you know, it's like where else would that happen? So it's got to happen somewhere, like the in-person, it's too easy to lose track of, and it's not factored in quite so much in a lot of our discussions of like land use, basically in these cities. And there's a lot of crazy urban planning that's happening now. People are really thinking about what the world in the future is going to look like, what our city's going to be like. So for me, recording studio being a community center, being important because it's physical. Record stores, these are all kind of things I try to advocate for as much as I can.
Sure. No, it makes sense, man. I mean, I really admire what you do, and I know that about your struggle. I mean, like obviously from watching the doc, and then just kind of hearing you speak about it constantly, because it's important, because it's true. I mean, the clips in the movie of Gowanus and your surrounding area, I was just like, holy shit! Like how do you even live there? like it looks really bad. Like it's very polluted. I don't know what it's like there now. I have never been there actually, but just pretty depressing to see that looking like that, you know. So I hope things are getting better.
Wow, it's brownfield central. I mean, it really is brownfield central. There's in the 82 square blocks of the rezoning of Gowanus. There's what 35 brownfields. Brownfields meaning that they need to be remediated, and the state New York State is overseeing some kind of cleanup, and they're considered to need they need cleanup to be habitable and safe.
Right.
So that whole topic, and we're learning more and more. I mean, it's all hidden. Like, it's, if you walk around here, it just looks like streets and stuff. But what's under those streets? What's under the? I was shocked. There's a place near here. It's like a bar, a shuffleboard bar, like shuffleboard stuff. It's kind of big, and I realized, wow, they have a vapor intrusion barrier like under the whole building, because it's so carcinogenic, just the vapor coming through from the soil because of this all these petroleum products and stuff. So it's the pollution is kind of incredible, really.
Wow. Crazy, man. Well, I mean, look, I did I certainly didn't want to end this there, but I mean, I know you also have a not a foundation, you have some organization in regards to Gowanus and this cleanup that's happening, correct?
Yes, Voice of Gowanus, and if anyone's interested, voiceofgowanus.org, and there's a lot of the stuff we're advocating on there, and there's always some action that we're advocating for, like a letter to the governor that we're having signed by people, stuff like that, and some information. Yeah, so we're operating on a lot of fronts. We're suing the city. Voice of Gowanus.
Okay, well, great. I mean, I know that we haven't expounded on that very much, but if anyone is interested, I will supply links in the show notes and all that, so that people can read up on that more, kind of become more informed about it, and obviously, sign petitions and so forth, and support in any way that they can for you.
Yeah, and it's all tied together. Like, it actually really is tied to the even also the survival of the studio, because greed doesn't know any limits, and it plows right through health considerations, or considerations about small businesses, or considerations about the arts, and everything. All of that stuff is consistently done as a band-aid. They do it's all greenwashed, it's all art washed, it's all this stuff where they just do a little bit without really profoundly addressing or fixing or mitigating the problem. It's just like a little bit, and they go, "Yep, we fixed. We're doing this." So they're doing just enough that they can, just enough that's not interfering with.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So it's so it is all tied together, because the enemy is the same one.
No, I hear you, man. It sucks. Look, I wish you the best of luck in everything. I thank you for the records. I mean, I did buy them, but thank you for suggesting this. The Ex Nihilo is a great album, and then your new one, Feral Myths, obviously not available on vinyl yet, but you can still pick it up on CD. And I wish you the best with that. Are you touring anytime soon? Are you going to do any more gigs?
No, it's probably going to be in the fall, and that's still coming together. So, not this spring.
All right. Well, we'll direct people to your website and all that good stuff, so that they can find out what you're doing and when, and they can catch you.
Cool. Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Martin. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Vinyl and Vision is a Psychic Static production. Theme song written and performed by Jeff Robbins of 123 Astronaut.